Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 20th of September 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to say we're joined today by Alex Thomson, who'll be speaking to us from the Netherlands. And of course, Alex presents as Eastern approaches. Well, do we have any good news today?
No. The United Nations General Assembly kicked off yesterday, and Donald Trump was at his first ever speech to the UN General Assembly. And I think once again it absolutely demonstrated his schizophrenia. He spoke about about creating a world order of strong sovereign nations with different values, different cultures, different dreams, not just coexist, but to work side by side on the basis of mutual respect, making common cause in the greatest shared interests of all, a future of dignity and peace for the people of this wonderful earth. So very Trump-like language, but nonetheless expressing what many people might view as sensible approach to things. But then he went on to say, that as President of the United States, he's going to put America first. He said that just like you, as leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first. The nation state remains the best vehicle for elevating the human condition.
Well, right, that's good.
So far, so good. But then, of course, here came the personality switch, and we moved straight on to regime change. He said that there's a small group of rogue, criminal, depraved, corrupt, destabilizing regimes. This is I've paraphrased multiple sentences into one here, but this was the type of language that he was using. And who are these depraved nations? Well, of course, North Korea, Iran, Syria, Cuba, and Venezuela. These are the ones that need to be ousted.
So they're nation states, but they're not following the right agenda, so they've got to be brought into line.
Absolutely, and absolutely. So he said the United States, if forced to defend itself or its allies, will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. And he said that he also, not directly, but he kind of threatened Russia and China by sort of thanking them for joining in with the sanctions against North Korea, but he sort of said that, of course, Ukraine, there's still a threat to sovereignty there, and of course, South China Sea, that's a bit dodgy too. And he said about North Korea, that North Korea was an outrage, he said that it is an outrage that some countries would not only trade with such a regime, but would arm, supply, and financially support a country that imperils the world with nuclear conflict. If forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime, he said.
Rocket Man.
Rocket Man, this is what Kim Jong-un is now known as far as Donald Trump is concerned. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary.
Right. So
there you go. Perhaps another indication of Donald Trump's schizophrenic personality was this, because this was coming out in the mainstream press. It was an interview between the former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Thomas Pickering, and R.I.A. Novosti yesterday. And he was saying, well, actually, we've got a back channel open to North Korea, and discussions are continuing quite nicely. Thank you very much. He said there's nothing specific to report yet. But no problem. We're continuing conversations. So it's very hard, Brian, and we can maybe ask Alex about this in a second. But it's very hard to sort of get a grip on what the United States is aiming to achieve here by threatening so strongly on one hand, but playing another game on the other.
Yeah. Well, I think all of this is almost a sign of impending breakdown in America, because I don't think the Americans have got a coherent position at the moment. But the other thing is that Trump is not thinking these matters through himself. I think this is purely the result of advisors coming to him with the pre-written speeches. This is what we think you ought to say, President. And he is not reading through and really thinking about what he's saying. He's just delivering the words. That's my take on it.
Alex, what are your thoughts?
Well, not to make it too complicated for a lunchtime slot, but there are three interest groups competing here. Two of them are US-based particularly, and they've been dubbed before the Red Empire and the Blue Empire. And the third is encroaching into the US, and it's described as Prussian or Platonic model. And it is trying to harness Trump, the latter of them is, by saying, look, if we build infrastructure and cooperate with Russia and China, all will be well. This is represented by Steve Bannon, and his in-out hokey-cokey within the White House is caused by the fact that he represents a new group vying for control. Now, the two that are established in Washington, the Red Empire and Blue Empire, is one terminology. Well, the Red Empire is the Anglo-American military muscle with the city and links to Jesuitry and Zionism. And that is very interested in kicking over any country that exports mineral wealth other than dollar denominated. And that's why North Korea is being threatened in the same breath as Venezuela and Iran in this speech. The Blue Empire is the communists, as it were, and Joel Skousen well identifies that they are below the globalists, so they're not top dog. And they, of course, have a back channel to DPRK, as the State Department guy you quoted said, because there's a wing of communists in the State Department in particular, and the Department for Education in Washington, that have used East Asian Marxist tyrannies as a kind of testbed for what they want to do in other parts of the world. So three factions vying for Trump's head. He is a businessman. He has no understanding of foreign policy. He is called up to the podium in that speech as His Excellency and given his proper title. And does he return the courtesy and diplomatic usage of calling Kim by his proper title? No, he doesn't. I hate Kim too. For the sake of someone listening who thinks I am pro-Netanyahu, I was disgusted to see Bibi Netanyahu vigorously nodding when Trump was saying we'll destroy Iran if they don't toe the line. Netanyahu's been going around for 20 years talking about that, whereas Saudi Arabia does far worse things. Well, we can talk till the cows come home about this, but basically Trump's head is focused on business and infrastructure, and his foreign policy ideas are up for grabs. Not a word of this came out of his own head.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, lots going on in the United Nations, and one of the topics that Trump brought up yesterday, or one of the things that he tried to encourage yesterday, was United Nations reform. So this was prior to the meeting of the opening of the General Assembly, and Trump presented a 10-point declaration on UN reform. 128 nations signed the statement. It calls for greater efficiency. It calls for reducing personnel, things like that. But some notable exceptions to signatures on this. Russia, China, and France did not sign, and the Russians were quite outspoken about this. Here's Mr. Gatilov, the Deputy Foreign Minister. He said, "We stand for the reform and believe it should be a comprehensive reform, but decisions linked with reform are to be made by member states through dialogue." And the Russians absolutely complaining that this document was not distributed amongst member states before it was presented in the meeting, and people were expected to sign it.
It's very European Union, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And maybe Leonid Slutsky, who's the chair of the Duma's International Affairs Committee, he said Trump's reform is a landmark move towards a unipolar world and the reduction of the role of the UN. Yeah. And I think this is an interesting thing because, many of us criticize the United Nations for being what it is, but on the UN Security Council, for example, we have Russia, China that have put the brakes on many of the sort of policy, particularly the regime change policy agendas that the United States and the United Kingdom have tried to push forward with. Yeah. And I just wonder if this if that's really what's driving this from Trump at the moment. But in the meantime, of course, we have to ask, what's Theresa May doing at the UN Security Council? Well, of course, as we said last week, she is absolutely doing this. She is focusing on internet censorship in line with David Cameron's policy as he outlined it at the UN General Assembly when he was Prime Minister in 2014. She's co-hosting a meeting on preventing terrorist use of the internet, and she's there being supported by French President Emmanuel Macron and the Italian Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni. So internet firms can and still should do more, they say, can still do more to stop the spread of evil material by groups such as Daesh, which promote terrorism and provide information on how to make bombs or attack pedestrians with vehicles. And the language in this is really interesting because, of course, it comes just after the so-called bucket bomb at Parsons Green, which into the bucket apparently contained some homemade explosives, no doubt.
We should outlaw buckets. Well, I think that's the solution.
That could well be. Yeah. But she wants the tech firms to develop new technological solutions to prevent content being uploaded in the first place. So we're not only going to censor stuff which is already on the internet. We're not only going to censor stuff which is historic, because they've been talking about that as well, but we're now going to stop content being uploaded in the first place.
This is thought crime.
Absolutely.
This is heading towards thought crime.
Absolutely. And where terrorist content, what they describe as terrorist content, does appear, they want a target of 1 to 2 hours for taking it down, because they say that that's the time, that 1 to 2 hour time slot is the time when most of that gets shared. So as I say, she's hosting this event. It's going to be attended by the usual suspects: Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, Google, and these are the groups that agreed to set up this new global internet forum to counter terrorism. So here's what she's saying: industry needs to go further and faster in automating the detection and removal of terrorist content online and developing technological solutions which prevent it being uploaded in the first place. But this isn't the only thing she's up to. Yesterday, she was hosting another meeting, this time on tackling modern slavery. She said that it's a crime that has no respect for borders, and therefore we've got to have a truly international response. We therefore are going to host an international summit of chief prosecutors next spring. And in addition, the UK will double its aid spending on modern slavery to £150 million, enabling more work in collaboration with source and transit countries. And she said this will also include £20 million of seed funding to the new global fund to end modern slavery. We're delighted to be contributing to this initiative, which my US colleague will say more about, and I wholeheartedly commend this initiative to you all. Now, of course, we've been highlighting this issue of modern slavery in recent weeks and making the point that this money, this few £150 million, just a drop in the ocean compared to the billions and billions, £150 billion or so that's being made annually on this out of modern slavery. So this is merely the cost of doing business, but it doesn't end there. Because as we mentioned a couple of days ago, in parallel with the UN General Assembly, the Commonwealth is holding a meeting in order to prepare for the Commonwealth Heads of State meeting, which is next April. She said, I look forward to this unique organisation coming together at next year's Heads of Government meeting to pursue an ambitious agenda for a more prosperous, secure, fair and sustainable future for everyone. Brilliant. Now, the theme of the 2018 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is towards a common future, and it sets out 4 main goals, as she lists in her little quote here: prosperity, security, fairness and sustainability. This is going to be the biggest Heads of Government meeting that the UK has ever hosted. It's going to take place places like Buckingham Palace, St James's Palace, Windsor Castle, all the best places in London, and so that's what she's going to do. We've been saying for a long time, Brian, that the question in the minds of the British establishment has been, what is the best path towards global government? Is it the United Nations or is it the Commonwealth? And we see them taking parallel tracks on this. So if anybody wants any background to this issue, do have a look on the UK Column website at the One World Governance series of articles, largely authored by Martin Edwards, and you'll get a pretty clear idea as to what this is all about. There are also a couple of articles on the UK Column website on the issue of fairness and what she actually means when she uses that term.
Theresa May's got a unique definition of fairness, as we'll come back to Melanie Shaw. So child abuse whistleblower is put in solitary confinement by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary. That's her definition of fairness.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just to end off this section then, NATO, sorry, I've gone a bit far there. This is something else which is going on at the UN General Assembly at the moment. This is the signing ceremony for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this is a treaty that was organised in July. 122 countries voted for this treaty on prohibition of nuclear weapons, but it's much to the angst and chagrin of the West, and particularly NATO countries. So none of the countries that actually have nuclear weapons were among the 122 that signed it. They don't want to sign it. The UK, the US, and France in July issued a joint statement saying we do not intend to sign, ratify, or ever become party to it. So it's from the West point of view, it's a pretty popular thing. This is what NATO had to say about this today. Seeking to ban nuclear weapons through a treaty that will not engage any state actually possessing nuclear weapons will not be effective, will not reduce nuclear arsenals, and will neither enhance any country's security nor international peace and stability. Indeed, it risks doing the opposite by creating divisions and divergences at a time when a unified approach to proliferation and security threats is required more than ever. They said the ban treaty, as it is at odds with the existing non-proliferation and disarmament architecture. This risks undermining the non-proliferation treaty, which has been the heart of global non-proliferation and disarmament efforts for almost 50 years. It's worked well in that time, hasn't it? No. And the IAEA safeguards regime, which supports the crisis caused by North Korea, underlines the importance of preserving and enhancing the existing framework of the NPT. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think there's, I think the correct term is a Hegelian approach going on here, because on one hand, we know that the objective of the UN is to get rid of nuclear weapons. The only military power should be in the hands of the UN. Then we've got the very strong, powerful lobby by the nuclear armed countries to keep it. But you see these two paths, to me, are played alternatively altogether in order to take this control to some form of global system. And I'll just add, well, tomorrow we're hoping to do a little bit of a specialist piece on defence. But if I take one name, Lord Boyce, who was former Chief of Staff, so senior naval officer, but he's on Forces TV saying we've got to keep Trident, we've got to keep our nuclear weapons. But at the same time, he sits on a European board, which is also campaigning to get rid of nuclear weapons. So we see these two sides. Alex, it's complex. My best take is that the two sides are being played deliberately to confuse the wider population.
I agree, absolutely, Brian. And we better complete the triad of philosophers. We've mentioned Plato and Hegel, two nasty chaps who, for the sake of elite patrons, wrote philosophical manuals to how an elite could control the world through deception and so on. Well, complete the triad, the one that we're seeing the last hurrah of, which is now pulling out all the stops through its British royalty assets and so on, is the Aristotelian persuasion, which is the one that's dominated the British and other Western establishments for a long time, which is that man is a beast, he has no soul, and religion is there to keep the people productive and believing in their secular government. So in order to overthrow these, we need to go back to proper philosophical bases, particularly those of the early Roman Republic, which are far more interesting and humane versions of how to rule. But no, we're seeing, it's crucial to grasp this, we're seeing vying sorts of elitism, and many forms of cabal can use the same techniques of deception, such as the Hegelian controlled narrative and controlled opposition idea. People really have to start thinking for themselves. In order to research this, one of the best places to start would be a website called The Campaigner Unbound, which is a collection of painstakingly retyped articles from the 1970s output of the LaRouche movement, The Campaigner Unbound. Read that thoroughly and you'll see particularly what the Aristotelians are up to and why they're on their last gasp now.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Now, yesterday, I think it was, we mentioned the fact that Jeremy Corbyn had decided to ban Saudi Arabian representation from the Labour Party conference. That didn't go down too well with some. So that's the Labour Party approach to Saudi Arabia. His argument being, of course, that Saudi Arabia continues to bomb the hell out of Yemen and carry out other atrocities, including funding terrorism and so on. But it's particularly the Yemeni issue that the Labour Party was concerned about. Well, the Tory party doesn't seem to have the same kind of concerns because Michael Fallon today has announced a new defence pact, a new military and security cooperation agreement, as it's called, with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is what he had to say. I'm delighted to have signed today with His Royal Highness the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia a new military and security cooperation agreement which further cements the UK's long-standing relationship with our key Gulf partner. So this agreement apparently is going to promote cooperation between the UK and Saudi across the defence and security sectors. It's going to help Saudi Arabia better protect her national security, including counter-terrorism, intelligence, training and education, medical services and logistics. No doubt there's an arms deal or two involved in that as well. And it was signed while Fallon is over touring the Middle East. He was in Iraq, where he visited the Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar as well, as we reported a couple of days ago. So he's continuing his tour around the Middle East and doing dirty deals with dirty partners.
No debate in Westminster on this at all, so no input by any backbench MP as to what this is about, why we're doing it. It's just bang announced. In exactly the same way that Cameron announced the 50-year defence pact with the French, no debate in Westminster. So we're definitely not in a democracy at this stage.
No, I mean it's almost on a weekly or bi-weekly basis at the moment. We've got new partnership agreements, whether it be on free trade or defence, but it's mainly defence at the moment. Decided
by we don't know who behind closed doors. And of course the thing I have to keep coming back to with Michael Fallon is, what is the expertise of this man? It's children and children's nurseries. That's what he began his business career doing.
Absolutely. Now, let's move to Ukraine. And Alex, a couple of, was it last week? I think we highlighted the fact that Mikhail Saakashvili had crossed the border into Ukraine from Poland illegally without a passport, because of course he's currently stateless, because the Ukrainians have revoked his citizenship. And the Georgians also revoked his citizenship. That's where he was president. They not only revoked his citizenship, but they've got an arrest warrant out for him at the moment. But he's moved across the border into the Ukraine. And last week I suggested to you that he had received a call from his uncle George, Soros that is, telling him to do this. The saga continues. He doesn't seem to have been arrested by the Ukrainian authorities. What is he up to?
I think it's as simple as that he's down and out, and he's out on his ear, in fact. He's got no statehood. He's 49. We don't know what state his marriage is in. He's got his political movement in Georgia has eschewed him. He's got no passport. So the only thing he can do is depend on Soros. And Soros has, I think, taken a dislike now to Petro Poroshenko, the chocolate magnate who's corruptly ruling Ukraine, because although Poroshenko was swept to power in very much a Sorosite coup a couple of years ago with plenty of bloodshed and plenty of EU help, Poroshenko now seems to be, some Russians are suggesting he's actually secretly serving the Russians by being so over-the-top Nazi. It's kind of causing such a scandal. It might be in Russia's political interest to point fingers at the EU and Soros this way. So anyway, Poroshenko's not obeying Uncle George anymore. And I think Misha is a very useful asset who's got nothing to lose and much to gain by being injected into the body politic in Ukraine. And he's saying in those two Irish Times articles, it's not a coincidence that Irish mainstream journalism is puffing him up, by the way, because Soros has a huge presence in Ireland, which we're only just becoming aware of now. He's saying in these articles, the oligarchies must listen to me. I will at least get the west of the Ukraine in my grasp, and so on. All overblown, but there you go. How did he get there? Well, Poland has some questions to answer, and not for the first time the Polish government appears to be playing a very duplicitous game.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's move on to the continuing pressure on Russia. And you've got a couple of articles here. The left says, Polish defense minister says Russia may use nuclear weapons in Zapad 2017 drills. I mean, how much more nonsense do we have to listen to with regard to this exercise, military exercise in Belarus? I mean, I realize that this is just next door to Poland, but nonetheless, Russia has been quite open about the scenario that they're training for here, and it's one of internal insurgency rather than any kind of external threat or any kind of invasion to Poland, for example. So, does this nonsense ever end?
Not from these kinds of men, because the Polish defense minister there on the left and the Estonian chief of staff there on the right are men whose fortunes are wedded politically and personally and in career terms to NATO. And NATO's got itself into such a rhetorical pitch now that it's painted itself into a corner. The only thing it can do is accuse the nasty Ruskies of being one step ahead in the nuclear tensioning game. Well, we've just seen in the previous segment what a pitch we've reached with nuclear weapons. It's within a lot of second world countries' grasp now to go nuclear, and that's petrifying the Aristotelian establishment because they lose their monopoly of menace, as it were. So as part of a piece with this, the Central and Eastern European belt countries, particularly the ones with a long geostrategic history like Poland of scheming, they're realizing they have to cling to the underbelly of the dying masters, the Anglo-French Zionist owners of nuclear weapons technology. And in order to do that, they're going to have to accuse the Russians again of being one step ahead of them.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to Germany and the German elections, which are coming up. Now, who is it we're looking at here?
This is Björn Höcke, who is not, in fact, one of the leading candidates for the Alternative für Deutschland party, but he's one of the most popular men in the party. He makes much of being a family man, and he's in the eastern state of Thuringia, which is the most cultured of the former East German states of Germany. And here he is in his stump speech for the coming weekend's German federal elections, raising the rafters with cheers several times in his speech, saying things like, "We are provoking NATO by sending the Bundeswehr, the German army, to do maneuvers 20 miles from the Russian border. In Georgia, this must stop. If we get into government, we'll stop it." Huge cheer. "We must be friends with the Russian people." Huge cheer. And in fact, a week after he gave this speech, his fellow AfD member in Thuringia, in fact, the Spitzenkandidat, the leading candidate for the AfD in that state of Germany, gave a speech in which he said that Merkel is actually an accessory to treason, so it's misprision of treason in the German model, which he's now naming. And so Höcke's colleague is saying in a speech just after a similar one as Höcke gave here, that every time Merkel lets migrants in, contrary to the provisions of German law and treaty law, she actually became an accessory to crime and needs to go away for. He calculated that she would be due a 35-year sentence if convicted by a German court for the transgressions of German federal criminal law. Of course, that would be reduced to 15 because of judicial practices, but it would be the rest of her life. He's serious about it. Höcke's fellow candidate, saying the same things as Höcke saying in these subtitles, said very much, "Vote for us this weekend, and on Monday morning there will be an arrest warrant signed for Merkel." So quite interesting times, we can say. We covered last April 2016, that this party, AfD, managed to sweep the board in the neighbouring state of Eastern Germany, which is Saxony-Anhalt. Half of that state went completely AfD. And the big unknown is whether, it was raised in the speech by Höcke, whether there will be electoral fraud on a mass scale. If so, then we might see that the popularity of the AfD, particularly in the western cities dominated by the old machine, is actually downplayed. But as things stand, it looks like a large proportion of the Germans are going to vote for AfD, even in the areas of Western Germany we associate with liberalism, because they've had so many problems there with migration out of control and their businesses going bust. As Höcke said in the speech as well, there's no capital left in Germany. We associate it with great wealth, Germany, but the Eastern German capital has remained in state hands since the GDR days. The Western companies have been bled dry by complicated problems with the euro, which he's talking about here, and the energy problems. So Germany is actually a lot of Germans are barely making ends meet, even the respectable middle class types you meet. They haven't got any money left over in their budget. And if you really want to annoy a German, you hit him in his savings. They now have realized that they've got no savings, and they are absolutely livid. They're far more alert to these things than Anglo-Saxons would be, who seem to be happy at the moment to live in perpetual debt. The Germans are not going to stomach that.
Brian, you know, as we watched this earlier on, and many of the points that are being made here are absolutely bang on the money, and a lot of common sense being spoken. But you know, there were times during this presentation where he was becoming rather nationalist in some of the things that he was saying. And you know, the question, when I was speaking to Alex earlier, he's telling me that other people have been asking this question as well. But the question in mind is, you know, when does this type of nationalism become too nationalist? And because perhaps some people have drawn parallels to this type of rhetoric and perhaps some of the speeches that Hitler may have made in the early 30s.
Well, I think that's maybe a little bit strong, Mike, but I I can pick up on the concern there. The trouble is that we've now got in a position that if you are passionate about your country, that makes you automatically xenophobic. You are against other people. And this is an engineered view, which we see very strongly in UK. If you stand up for the fact that people are Scottish or Welsh or Irish or English, that automatically means you're going to be branded by the fact that you don't like immigrants, which of course is not true. So I think we've got to view him through very clear glasses and listen to what this man does. We've also got to say, let's watch what happens, because we can be prejudging him. On the other hand, in times of tension, and if people are beginning to feel the pressure of the state of their country, Germany in particular, this could swing off to a direction which would not be good. So I think your concern is well placed. Alex, do you sense that this is heading into what many people might say is right wing, simply because he's standing up for Germany and the German people?
I take a position perhaps halfway between yours and Mike's there, Brian.
I'd just like to stress this is not my position. I'm merely acting devil's advocate here.
Mike is being a devil's advocate and being we're serious newscasters, so we do like to present everyone else's opinions as well. The two positions that we just mentioned, I would say I'm halfway between them. Men like Hooker are serious Christian family men of the kind of type we really need back in politics, certainly as part of the mix to restore our constitutions, because they have a sense of the multi-generational nature of a nation, that we have a debt to the unborn and to the ancestors, rather than just robbing them their heritage and money blind for the sake of our own generation. But then there is a problem with some nationalistic outbursts. AFD has a habit of having firebrands, a bit more like Hooker or even to the right of him, and then rowing back at party leadership level. But they are being squashed by Deutsche Welle, Bertelsmann Media Corporation, and all the other great and good in Germany who would love to sneer at them. AFD's own position is they need to awaken a bit of German national sentiment in the spirit of Schiller. Churchill very significantly said it's the spirit of Schiller we must crush in the German people. That's the positive infrastructure building spirit of brotherhood of man. Churchill wanted to destroy that in the Second World War. So the AFD want to revise Schillerism, a positive pro-humanity approach to life. And they have said that if they play their cards right, stay away from the real neo-Nazis, which is the NPD in Germany, then they could actually swing the whole of Europe back in the next 10 or 15 years, they said in the last stump speech, swing it back in the next 10 or 15 years to a sensible constitutional pro-nation policy. We will see.
Could I just add, before we leave this particular subject, encourage people to go and have a look at that speech themselves. The subtitles seem to be very accurate, so you can gauge well. But he comes out with a lot of very precise information to do with the banking system, the state of pensions. So there's a lot of very detailed information of, as he says, the mess Germany is in as a result of the European Union.
Alex?
You will find that video on the channel German Ambassador, a new channel launched by Hagen Grell.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, let's a couple of ads. Just a reminder that tonight is the UK Column Monthly meeting in the George in Plimpton, 7:30 or so. Get along to that if you can. AV 8.1, the interim alternative view event, is taking place in the Connaught Rooms in London on Sunday the 8th of October. Brian will be speaking, Patrick Henningsen, Ian Crane, it's his event, and Dr. Graham Downall will be there as well. And also don't forget Media on Trial on Thursday the 19th of October in the Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church in London. John Pilger speaking at that, Patrick Henningsen, Peter Ford, Vanessa Bailey, and a number of others. Okay.
All right, well, let's just move on to data, big data in the NHS, and thank you very much to the lady who sent this through to us. It's alerting that there's big changes coming with the NHS. We've got here a review of data security consent and opt-outs. This is another government initiated document with forward by the data, well, she's the data guru of UK, the big protector of data, Dame Fiona Caldicott. And what she's saying is that we must have trust in the NHS. There isn't trust because there's been big problems with data. So we're going to restore that trust. What's interesting is we're going to restore it by giving others, a great number of others, access to the NHS data. But if you don't like it, you can opt out. Okay, so let's go and have a look at what how this pans out. Here's part of NHS Digital. This is a whole industry inside of the NHS, and we've got the National Data Opt-out Programme. So it's saying, well, we're going to share your data, but don't worry because you're going to be able to opt out. Timescales, well, this is moving in pretty quickly. We're developing the system now. Patients will be able to use the system to state their national data opt-out preferences by March 2018. All health and care organisations will uphold these preferences by March 2020.
So what happens in the intervening 2 years?
Your guess is as good as mine. I followed this through and it just got fascinating. I happened to select pack 2. So these are information packs on what's going on here. I decided to go for 2. So I press the button and it takes you through to actually a PowerPoint presentation about the national data opt-out. It's all pretty simple stuff, but here we are. When does the national data opt-out apply? Data shared for planning and research purposes. There's a tick and it says this identifies you personally. I had trouble interpreting this myself. Perhaps you and Alex can help here, but it seems to me they're suggesting that this identifies you personally and you'll be able to opt out. Whereas in the second one, data is shared between the health and care professionals in hospital and GP practice. This identifies you personally, but I think you won't be able to opt out if I'm interpreting this correctly. And the same with the legal requirement. This identifies you personally, but you won't be able to opt out. So it's a very, very interesting.
Just go back to that one. That last option, data is anonymized. The data shared is determined to be compliant with the ICO anonymization, Managing Data Protection Risk Code of Practice. This is a pretty insidious aspect of this idea of anonymized data, because of course once you put anonymized data sets along with other data sets, you can unanonymize people once again.
Pretty quickly, and you've mentioned that several times, Mike. And of course, this is the danger of the whole thing here. Well, we've got a nice little diagram. Now, we've only been able to look at this very quickly, so encourage people to track this information down themselves. But basically, we've got the front end, which is patient-facing digital front end, because they want you to do everything that you're going to do in a digital form. They don't really want any face-to-face contact or letters going back and forth. So massive data storing capacity there with a data bank. And then it talks about who's having a look at the data. Well, I just had a quick look at these two little icons here because they're absolutely fascinating. And this is where they took me. So one took me to information for care providers in Bromley. Presume this is a sort of example of where NHS data gets shared. Well worth going to that website because it's everything. It's my life, Bromley My Life, and everything is connected in there, including the multi-agency public protection arrangements. But this is the other one that interested me. It went to a healthcare organisation, and I thought that looks interesting. Well, it absolutely was, because it's based in Adelaide, Australia.
Oh.
So are they suggesting that because Bupa is involved at the bottom, that your data is going to be shared with Australians?
Looks like it.
It does look like it. Then here's the implementation timetable, September 2017 to June 2020. So let's think about this. It's racing through. You've got to opt out. They are going to share the data. If you don't like it, they might give you the opportunity to opt out. And if you follow all of this stuff through, here's NHS networks. Have a look at this. This is 115,009 members of this one NHS network. So sharing your data, it's not with one or two organisations. This is massive sharing. But here was the Centre for Patient Leadership, and that fascinated me. This is experts working with people in health problems who form the Centre for Patient Leadership. If you get into what these guys are doing, it is this. It's change agents. And how do I know that? Because they actually say that's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be working inside with patients to change the whole organisation of the NHS. So, Alex, we want to get you back on. Time's ticking. It's pretty obvious now that the NHS, virtually privatised. Are you really dealing with a public body? I don't think so. And that data is vital to the big drug companies and anybody who wants to make money out of healthcare.
It's worth a fortune.
You know, some of the sharkiest companies in the English-speaking world are actually outside Britain. In the US, of course, we associate that with big pharma and all kinds of other nasty companies. But it's a shocking number of the worst companies, whether it's pharmaceutical or mining or whatever, the most human exploiting and resource exploiting companies are Canadian and Australian based. And somehow, under a common law framework, they managed to get away with it. The amount of banditry that goes on in those companies is amazing. They're mostly listed in Toronto and Sydney stock exchanges rather than the FTSE. But they have a huge opportunity in Britain because we have a larger population than they do and more densely controlled and so on. So I think we're sitting ducks for those kind of companies. You may find that Australia, not being an EU member, obviously, has very much fewer or laxer data protection laws when it's outside Australia, at least, than other countries do. So I have a particular, my hackles are raised whenever I see certain sectors from Australia and Canada getting into the UK, much as I love the people of those countries.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll just add these two because it took us in an interesting place. We've got a big event here. This is TOPRA Annual Symposium 2017, Collaboration Strategy Solution, Global Regulatory Approaches to Improve Healthcare. And if you don't know what the organisations are, well, the big one here, TOPRA, is Professional Membership Organisation for Individuals Working in Healthcare Regulatory Affairs. The second one is actually the government, Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. So big get together here, but this is where it gets fascinating because if I bring this in, what are these guys talking about? Well, Brexit. Exiting the EU, preparations and impacts. So that's good, Mike, isn't it? However, if you go up one, what we're actually talking here is this is your chance to meet MHRA specialists, including Dr. Ian Hudson, CEO, who will present on the European network strategy and its priorities for 2018. So if we want proof there is no Brexit, we couldn't get any better than here. And if we just drop down, we've got digital healthcare revolution, well, we're talking about that already, and collaboration on the world stage, how agencies are working together. So this is global and European policy. There is no Brexit. And I'm just going to reinforce this. Another article, different subject. This is a partnership, which we mentioned before, Heart of the Southwest, a local enterprise partnership that literally created itself. We'll come on to it again, I'm sure. We did cover this some time ago. But if you have a look at their logo, we're straight into the European Union again because we've got the European Structural and Investment Funds. This is what they are about. And if we have a look at one of the articles they're promoting, it's the European Regional Development Fund, low carbon funding opportunities. So I'm going to put into that again, we're into what Brexit?
Indeed. Now, just to end the programme, Alex, because I'm afraid we're running out of time, let's bring this one up on screen. Voting still soon to be a Soviet-style political privilege. The Guardian headline is ban social media trolls from voting. Election watchdog suggests. Is this really where we're going?
Well, if people want to freeze the frame and read the bits I've underlined in red from the submission by the Electoral Commission, it may well be the way we're going. The three extracts I've put there from the PDF on the right is what the Guardian article is based on. Now, the Electoral Commission is basically a lobby or trade union for professional politicians. That's what it's become. In the past, we never used to have such a thing. We had returning officers and everything was done locally, as it should be in a common law system. But no, now we have these electoral commissions in the same way as Napoleonic countries do. And they set the rules. And if they think that someone's broken criminal law, at least the kind of law they've had framed in statute, then they can ban not just candidates from standing or being re-elected, but they can also ban us from voting, they think. And that's what the middle paragraphs from 21 onwards are actually saying that in this age, that's the top right box there, in this age of apparently lots of harassment of candidates, blub, blub, what we can do is we can prosecute people for electoral offences as voters, so active voting citizens, as it were, and keep them off the list for voting. But then, as they admit on the bottom there was a quarter of the candidates whom they surveyed, because they represent the candidates, never forget, the Electoral Commission. A quarter of the candidates responded. That was over 1,000, I think 1,300 of them, and only 4 or 5 actually said they had personal or other first-hand knowledge of harassment, and they failed to provide any details. Interestingly, this inquiry is by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. It nestles itself in Parliament, but if you look at it in the organogram on parliament.uk, you will quickly find, well, not quickly, but you will find in the end, that it is neither a committee of the Commons, nor of the Lords, nor of joint houses of Parliament. It is an arm of the government which sits in Westminster in Parliament and pretends to be a committee.
That's very interesting, Alex. I didn't appreciate that. Okay, thank you very much for that. That's a pretty dangerous development.
And we will follow up on that. Well, there it is. We don't make up the news. We're putting together what's really happening in UK. We're certainly not in a democracy. This is essentially a fascist state, a communitarian state, which is building itself very quickly, unless, of course, we stop it. How can we do that? Spread information. And somebody's pointed out that Ian Crane's talk tonight in Leicester is at 7 p.m. at the Funky Music Cafe. That's New Park Street, Leicester, and it's £8 on the door. So Ian has been doing great work with the anti-fracking community, trying to put a stop to that. This is the right sort of peaceful action to bring this malicious government to book. Thanks very much for joining us, Alex. Thank you for our viewers and listeners. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.